episode, we're going to talk about workplace bullying. Stay tuned. You want to kick it off, Nick? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that we should probably talk about then is, like, what do we mean by bullying? What's that look like? And does it take, like, when I think of bullying, I just think about the stuff that you can clearly see, right? And, I think one of the interesting pieces for, fire specifically, because I can't speak for the other services directly, but because it's all guys mostly, right? It's a male-dominated field, I think. And, it's that banter back and forth, and when does it actually cross that line? When does it become, bullying and harassment versus just kind of, locker room banter and good fun? So I think that's I think that'd be a pretty pertinent place to start. Like, when does it cross the line?
You see, and for the fire service, I think that line is it's a very thick line, because we do put up with a lot up until, right, and when that happens, that's when it's like, okay, snap, done, right? Yeah. I find for like nursing or female dominated places, and maybe it's a good mixture of both, that line is a lot thinner, and it could be a lot of different things. It could be out in the open stuff that you can see clearly, and it could be little things like, sending that person an email or making it so their work is late just because, you think it's funny, and then you're doing it every single day, and that person just piles and piles and piles, or little snarty comments. Or the big one is a lot of those toxic people in that environment will talk behind your back, and they'll be friend to you in your face, and it's just not okay.
Yeah, I think like the fire service, that's a hard one, because that shit's always going to get back to you. Like, you're always going to, if somebody's talking shit, it doesn't even matter. Like, and I'm talking like, you could think somebody is 2 hours away and we hear about it. Like, so that's one of I think the interesting thing about fire service, not that it doesn't happen, of course, but it's just like that idea that you think that it won't find its way back, right? That's what I always find just bewildering about people who want to talk shit is that, you always seem to find out about it.
Oh yeah, it always comes back, right? Like, and it spreads like wildfire. I think the reason it comes back is it spreads so fast that person can't cover up with more lies or more rumors or anything else like that, right?
Yeah. So where do you want to start? You want to start with some overt bullying, or do you want to start with some of that secretive stuff you were talking about?
Well, I would like to start more on the secretive end of things, the behind the back things, because I actually was having a chat with a friend of mine. He was going through stuff, and it's an incident that it's one of those things where you can easily slander someone over social media, right? And you don't even realize that person you're talking about is actually sitting in that group as well, and can read everything you're doing and documenting everything that you're doing. And not only does it wreck their reputation with the employer, it looks bad on the person doing that, right? So it kind of puts you in a tough spot on top of everybody else. And for that person, it was kind of it was crappy, because even all the stuff that you report to HR isn't out there to work for you. HR is out there to work for the company. And the company always comes first, no matter what. They're employees of the company as well, and they don't want to lose their jobs. They're going to do what the company wants them to do. So I mean, when you're talking crap about somebody behind their back, and especially in the fire service, like you're saying, it comes around pretty quick, and that'll actually beat down on someone pretty fast once they find out, because you might think that you have a pretty strong character, and you're like, yeah, I'm doing good, and then all of a sudden that gets around to you, and it just kind of punches you in the gut.
Yeah, I think, and I think it's a difficult thing to navigate too when we're talking about workplace toxicity, and just trying to the first responder world, you work pretty hard to get into it, and you work pretty hard while you're there. And I don't think anybody has gotten in this field thinking, wow, now I get to be just such an egotistical prick that this is going to be great, right? So it's like, and sort of what we were talking about a couple weeks ago too, about what creates that atmosphere of bullying, to make it okay, because it's obviously supported in some way or it wouldn't continue. So it's like they're making it okay, and then what's allowing that to be okay in those scenarios, and why isn't it getting fixed?
Yeah, I agree. That's it. It could it could be a number of things, and that's where I was talking earlier before we hit record there. The managing style. If the manager is not on top of that kind of thing and setting a good example, and that manager might be doing it themselves, then it's just going to compile and it's going to get worse and worse, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the downsides too. If you look at leadership that and maybe it catch some flack for this one, but you're looking at leadership who has simply just been there for so long that of course they would rise through the rank, right? Like especially in smaller departments too, where you think that everybody's buddy and friend, and so you've done your time, right? And I think that's a common thing to hear. So it's not leading because you deserve to be a leader; it's leading because you've done your time.
That's right. Yeah,
and it's
which
kind
is
of
tricky.
Yeah, it's a bit of a messed up metric too.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about now having to navigate a difficult workplace scenario, it's like, well, you might be friends with everyone involved first, and you can't see past your role versus that piece of it too. So it's like, what do you do there? And does the mere fact that this person who, for all intents and purposes, is like, well meant and maybe even like them, but because of this mentality that we're friends first, we can't stop or prevent or intervene effectively in something like this. And now we're creating that bad barrel situation that we're talking about.
If it was ran a little bit more like a sports team, like you become captain, you become assistant captain because of your character, of the type of leader that you are, it would probably make a lot of things much better, right? People would be taken a little bit more seriously. They would be a lot better leaders. The whole crew would probably respond in a much better way because that respect was actually earned and not just given.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you can, when we talk about leadership, and I don't want to get too far off the mark, but when you talk about leadership, you can tell those people regardless of what color hat they wear, right? So who they are, and so even if they don't wear the white hat, it's like, yeah, but I'm going to tell this person with a black hat or a red hat, I'm going to tell them way more and go with all of their all of my complaints or go with my grievances, because I know that if I go this other route, that nothing, you just get pushed aside or off to the wayside or not taken seriously. And so and then I think that creates different bubbles, not always, but then those bubbles create them. Now I've got a group over here that thinks A, a group over here that thinks B, and a group over here that thinks C, and we've all got to sort of work together. And so, Group A is always bashing against Group C and all of these things. And I think that creates that kind of higher level toxicity around separation and siloing between, different factions within the organization.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's kind of a tough one to talk with people about, because especially in the services, and I'm sure it's the same as the military, you still get that whole, well, that's how we've always done it. Right. So the change is going to be kind of hard to come along.
Well, and that ropes me back around to what allows it to continue, right? And I think that you're hinting on something, like if we've always done it this way, so we wear time on as a merit badge, right? And so it's like, well, I've dealt with this shit for 20 years, and therefore I get a better, I get more triangles on my epaulets than you do, right? So it's, I think that this idea is, well, I've done my time. How come you're complaining about doing yours?
Yeah, but it's still like, and the one thing that boggles my mind is, like, especially again relating back to the fire service, is you always get the, well, how come we can't just come together? How come we can't just be a tighter group? How come we can't, work better as a team? Well, that's why, because the leadership isn't there. Like, and I'm talking, like, I've talked to a lot of firefighters. Like, I have a friend that lives down in Florida. I have friends that are in Seattle. I have friends that are in Edmonton. I have a cousin in Edmonton. So it's all over the place. And And I'm sure it gets even worse with volunteer fire because, you know, the one person that actually had the time to stick around for 15 years and climb into that rank, you know, it still might not be the best person for that, but it's some of the worst leadership because they were the only one that stuck around, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it creates that, you know, that distrust. And then if you have distrust within the ranks, right, then that's when those factions start, I think, right? These little bubbles of, you know, microcosms of, well, I know that I can't trust, you know, Chief A, so I'm going to go to, you know, Chief B, or I'm going to go to, you know, Lieutenant A, and that's who I'll go to, right? And so I think just that separation, because, you know, ironically, given the things that we're talking about socially, right? But ironically, it's like when that hierarchy breaks down because we don't have faith in the ones that we're supposed to talk to, right? And I think that that's when we see this, like, this inability to use the command structure as it was meant to be used and to nip some of this in the bud, right?
Yeah. Well, and that the same thing you're talking about there, that falls on dealing with your mental health in that service as well. Because if you can't go to that person to get the resources and the help that you need, it kind of makes it tough. And I mean, I know that a lot of hospitals, they run a little bit more of a business like, right? The manager's just hired for the position.
Sure.
And then you give them training, right? So again, you might not have the best manager. And if there's an issue going on, you can't go to that manager because maybe they're not actually properly trained to deal with what you got. And again, HR is looking in the best interest of the company. So that kind of gets in the way. And I totally get what you're saying too. Like you're not going to build a strong team off of that kind of leadership, right? Like you can't go to that manager to get that fixed, then especially if they're part of the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's just it, right? And it's one of those, I think it's one of those unspoken, what's a good word for it? It's like one of those, you know, unspoken, polite things, right? I'm just not going to say any, I'd rather not say anything, or I'd rather not stir the pot, right? For those people that know that shit's going south. It's like, well, I'd rather not stir. I like where I'm at. I like what I'm doing. And this gets to that situation where it's like, if I speak up, do I then become the target? Right, instead of
most times you
just,
do.
right, instead of just being like, no, you're actually just fucking wrong, and that's why this what other person's bringing up to you. It's like, well, now there's two targets instead of one, and so it's not like we make it easier, incentivize, you know, whistleblowing or sticking up for each other either.
Oh, not at all. Like snitches get stitches still. and that's you know, you end up becoming the target when you're telling on people. But you know what? It shouldn't be a schoolyard to begin with. I shouldn't have to go and tell on you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you shouldn't be that type of a person. Like, and this is where I myself, like, don't get me wrong, I've been, and after doing the research, I've been the bullier and not realized it, right? Again, I had crossed that line, not knowing that I had crossed the line. I might have only been this far over the line, but I had gone home, and then I had messaged or called the person and said, hey, sorry, dude, like I didn't realize I crossed the line. I'm an asshole, and I apologize for that. You know, like, or you know, you get the whole you kind of picking on somebody when they're not in the room, and I've always been the type of guy like, hey, we need to talk. You know, like this is how I feel, and I've told that to all these guys. I'm sorry that I didn't come to you first and tell you before I went and talked about you, but I'm sure we've all done it, and I'm sure we'll all continue to do it because again, that line for everybody is different, and it's all on different spots. So you're never really going to know the exact spot, and it's even harder in our profession because, especially with the dark humor, right? You might drag somebody into some dark humor because that's the way that you cope with what's going on. Sure. And it could make things worse.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of like these kind of hidden and just, you know, what we call it kind of like invisible, understood things too, right? Like it's, you know, it's you think that we can band all of this together, and it's like, well, it's just understood that person A is disliked, so it's okay then, right? And then it's like, well, it's just understood that person A is disliked, and now I'm in a room full of 10 other people, and it's like, well, I don't want to be person B. And so it's like, do I speak up or do I say nothing? And are those, if I'm thinking of black and white terms, are either of those good ethical options? when option C is to say, maybe we shouldn't be fucking beaking off about these things, and and they're not here to defend themselves, right? But we kind of see it in that I don't want to stir the pot, or we think that by not engaging, maybe that's just enough. Like not engaging, at least I can say, well, I didn't say shit, right? It's
well, and I mean that's a good start. That's definitely a good start. I again, like, I see it as a family, right? And if it's a family, then you should be sticking up for your brother, right?
Yeah.
It's as long as that person already acknowledges what it is you're talking about, and you've had that talk with them to their face, and you're like, yeah, okay, well, that's one thing. But if you're blatantly saying something that you haven't confirmed, or might not be true, or maybe it is true, but nobody's tried to coach that person,
Yeah.
it's a whole different ballgame when you come to that. And then again, like, it makes me wonder, like, what are they saying about me?
Well, for sure, right? Like, and now we talk about how we create an atmosphere of toxicity where we start to distrust the people around us. Like, and if you're in a first responder or emergency service of any kind, right? It's like I can't afford to distrust these people around me, right? Like I have to rely on them. I got people's lives on the line. I've got my life on the line. I'm running around hectically trying to do 10,000 more things than I should have to do, but I'm still doing those. And I got to be able to trust these people around me. But you catch one person talking shit because they're having a bad day and they're trying to just make themselves quantify that with themselves or something like that. But you're the target. It's like, well, I can't trust you and I can't trust the three people you were talking around. Well, that's half of a fucking crew at this point. So now what do I do? It's like, well, I don't go to medical calls at, in the afternoon because I know that that's where that coffee club is. And so I'm just not going to do that. Right. Or however we start to try to separate it out. And it's now we're becoming less engaged, creating resentment. And so we can either quit or we can burn out or we can, other things can start to happen. Or things get worse because now people are going, well, we can't even rely on you to show up. It's like, it's not fucking like that, right? And it's, I think it can quickly create this just cascading and just whirlpool of shit.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and like you were saying, you start to go out of your way to avoid things. You don't go to barbecues, you don't go to fundraising events because that person or those people are going to be there. And you know what? I see my career, your guys' career, my wife's career. They're not careers that we can just go and be a schoolyard. You can't go in there. It needs to be like a sports game. Everything stays on the field. When you're on the field, it's game time. That's it, right? Yeah, you can joke around, you can have fun, but if you're going to be childish when you're working a code or you're trying to administer drugs and asking for help or whatever it may be, like there's too much there that you need to actually deal with that could potentially kill somebody. It's not okay to be childish in the moment, and even when you have time to sit down, like, you shouldn't be childish. Fine, after hours, or pull me into the office and let's have a chat. But when you're being childish in the moment, that gets in the way of people's jobs. And when you're drawing or you're pushing people away, they're not staying involved, they're not staying trained, they're not competent in what it is they're supposed to do because they're trying to avoid you or that group or whatever it is, right? And that's not good.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side too, it just it's like, I wore all of that shit, when I was a probie, and so now, like, you're a probie, and that comes with a certain initiation stage, right? And that's, that looks like X, Y, and Z, and so it's like this badge of honor where I'm, slowly indoctrinated into the idea that maybe it's acceptable or it's okay. It's part of the initiation and the brother or the sisterhood, right, for fire. And I'm sure that there's similar things going on in the other services or other fields where it's like, well, here's the initiation, right? Listen, this is the shit that's going to come at you for 6 months to a year or 2 years or until the next batch or whatever. And it becomes this indoctrinated thing where it's like, oh, okay, well, this is what it takes, right? It's like being initiated into a gang. It's like, well, okay, I gotta do this. And so then when it comes time for the next person, what's the incentive for them to push a rail against that?
See, and that's where, like, your whole statement, like, where do you draw the line, is exactly on point. Like, you know, I've heard stories about how probies were treated in Edmonton, and like, yeah, fine, dump a bucket of water on me once, but 7 times in a shift is a little ridiculous, right? Like,
Yeah.
fuck you.
Yeah.
I don't have that many clothes at work, and I carry a go bag that has like 3 outfits in it.
Right.
So you soak me 7 times, and I look like an asshole because I'm showing up to a call wearing just coveralls and underwear, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of crappy for people. Like, I'm glad that I have not experienced that. I have nothing but good things to say
Mm-hmm.
about my experiences this far in, right? Like, it's been amazing, and I wish more departments treated their people the way that I've been treated. You know, I felt like I've been taken under the wing and I've been taught, and you know, yeah, you get razzed on, and that's going to come with a boys club, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to come with a lot of other different situations. Any sports team you go on, you're going to get razzed, right? You're going to get a little bit beat up, but it's, if that person says, okay, I'm done, then it's time to be done,
Mm-hmm.
and call it at that point. But if that leader says, yeah, you're going to experience this and it's going to suck, but we're going to take you under our wing and we're going to take care of you, that's
Mm-hmm.
a whole different world. But if you have no light at the end of the tunnel, then you end up leaving your career because you're like, I just can't handle that anymore. It's so bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, why would I want to at this point? It's like, well, I got in this to, help people or support people, and I'm just actually just trying to stay fucking alive during my shift, right? I'm just trying to stay afloat, and it's at what point is showing up and going to work actually costing you more, right? Than being there, and then what do you do? Because as we know, right, once we lose this identity, like if people come and sit in my chair, it's like, what do I do if I'm not, a firefighter anymore, if I'm not a police officer anymore? It's like, well, who the fuck am I now? Like, because this is what I've worked so hard for. I did all my schooling for, probably spent, several years in. It's like, who do I become, and what does that mean? And that's crushing.
It is. And I think about it. I'm only 6 years in, and I think about that. That's who you are. It's just torn away from you, and it's like, well, what do I do now, right? And then you're right, you lose your identity, and it's, again, that ties back to the whole, if you're getting pushed out of what it is that you have tried so hard to get into, that's
Mm-hmm.
shitty,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll screw with you here, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just, I don't know, it's all over the place. Actually, I think that's something we should talk to Angela about, because she's experienced just that. Should we bring her on?
It might as well. I think that's as good a segue as any.
All right.
So give us an introduction, first name, last name, what you used to do, and as much as you would like to share, so people can get to know you.
Well, my name is Angela Ponting, and I'm a nurse here in Ontario. I'm still nursing, just in a different capacity, actually. Back in July, I left the hospital setting due to a lot of the issues you guys were discussing. You brought up many points that kind of struck home in terms of toxic work environment, whistleblowing, lack of supportive management, and just the whole, what you guys were just talking about in terms of um, things messing with you if you suddenly realize you might not be in that position anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was faced with leaving the hospital, I was like, what the hell am I going to do if I'm not a nurse anymore? What am I going to do? Um, and yeah, so you guys touched on some amazing points, and there's so much to bring to light here. And I don't think it's just unique to nursing profession. Like, obviously, it's across the board, right? Yeah, so it's across the board, and the whistleblowing is a huge thing. Um, the fear of actually going to someone and either confronting the person that is bullying or harassing you, or having to go to management. You don't, like you guys said, you don't want to be that person. So you put up with it and you put up with it, and then it just eventually grinds on your mental health. And Colorado, I was telling you about my Jerry Maguire moment, and that was what was kind of led me to leave the hospital, right? So I think, I like to look at it from a few perspectives, in that you guys were talking about burning out. So in the nursing profession, there's a lot of overworked individuals, and we're so burnt out emotionally from working, I'd say 60 hours a week minimum. When someone comes to you maybe with an issue saying, hey, I'm having some trouble with my mental health, or I'm having some trouble with another individual, we don't have much left in us to give to that person. So I'm not convinced that people do it out of a mean spirit. I don't think the bullying and harassment, I don't think anyone goes into a work situation and says, I want to be that that dick, right? Like they want to, I don't think any of us intentionally go to work in a job just so that we can bully people.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and you guys, especially, you get that caregiver's fatigue, right? I'm sure EMS is probably up there right beside you, right?
And I'd say policing is too, right? And I think any first responder service, no one comes to see us because they're having a good day or calls us because they're having a good day. So we have to often tap into low, like our own emotions to support other people when sometimes we can barely support ourselves.
That's
So
right. Yeah.
and I find too, like at work, I can hold it together and I can support patients and family members, and I can support coworkers to a certain extent. But by the time I get home at the end of the day, I can't, I snap. My son might drop a spoon on the floor and that's the end of the world. Um, so, you bring it all home, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's one thing we always talk about. You try and leave it all at work, and it never stays at work. And that's where I think the work that Nick's doing is actually quite helpful. And there's another person that I had stumbled upon that does the same thing. They're trying to work with the families, right? So they can help spouses realize what's going on when they come home, and sometimes they need to talk about it, sometimes they don't, and how to talk about it. And to actually, for us as first responders, go to our family and talk about it and let them know what's going on without giving away the rough dark details. But I mean, I could see that my wife as well, and me too. Like, you come home thinking, oh yeah, the day was, it was all right, but in your eyes, all right means somebody didn't die that day, but you still dealt with a lot. And then you come home and you snap on your kid for just being a little bit loud while you are trying to take your boots off, right?
Yeah.
So
I know it's, from my experience, my mom is a retired nurse. So it was really hard for me to kind of come out and talk to her about the fact that I couldn't kind of handle that environment anymore, and that, I had to leave the bedside nursing. It was hard. I felt like leaving bedside nursing and going to a different setting I was going to be less of a nurse. I'm not a real nurse anymore. And it was really, really hard to kind of come to grips with that. And she worked in the same environment that I worked in, and I even questioned other nurses. What makes me different that I can't handle what you guys have been working in for 25 years? Like, I don't. Is there something wrong with me? And you question that when you're being targeted or when you're not being supported. You start to question, is there something wrong with yourself? And then of course that pummels your self-esteem, so then you really don't feel like standing up for yourself. And in my case, I went off on some leave, and when I returned to work, I had to go to a return to work meeting, and some of my coworkers had printed off pictures of me out walking my dog and handed them into occupational health. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? They want you to come back to modified duties or graduated hours. But in the meantime, you've got people that are, I felt targeted. So if they're doing that when I'm off, what's going to happen when I return to work? All the chit chat in the background. And I was not really prepared to, put up with returning to an environment like that.
Yeah, no, and you know what? You shouldn't ever feel like you're lower than low. I know we deal with that in the fire service for sure. Like, oh, you're just a volunteer. Yeah, well, a volunteer is still a firefighter, right? Like, it doesn't matter what kind of a nurse you are. You're still a nurse. You still went 4 years of education. You still put in your time. You're doing what you can to help people where you can, and not everybody's built the same, right? Only so many people can deal with so many different things, and that's why you're better in this position and you're better in that position. And that's why we don't have a bunch of chiefs running around the fire ground, right? Like, not everybody can do that job. Maybe not yet, or maybe not ever, right? There's people that they might not make it past a firefighter because that's just where they're at and what they can handle. So I mean, I can see where you're getting at with that, and it's not cool when people are trying to dig into your personal life to try and just put you down just that one more step, right? Like, it's not okay that they're taking pictures of you walking your dog. Maybe that was your therapy, right? Maybe it
Yeah.
was prescribed. Maybe it was something that's helped you deal with what's going on, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the case too. Like, I've kind of adapted over the past year or so. I mean, I'm fortunate now. The position I'm in, all the environment is very pleasant, and we all get along, and we're all super supportive. But you kind of get to the point in the prior environment. Well, you know what? They're talking about me today. Hey, it's too bad they don't have anything else more important to talk about than me. You kind of start laughing things off a little bit, and you just, you know, I was thinking earlier when you guys were talking about reporting things and not being supported, and it's almost like you lose hope in that environment, right? Like, you just lose hope that anything's going to change, and that's kind of a terrible position to be in, right? To be in a hopeless position.
Well, it just compiles and makes everything worse, right? It makes it harder and harder. Again, that's kind of that stigma that builds up, right? It's you feel like you can't because it'll make things worse, and you're like, well, I should just be quiet so that way I don't have to deal with any more than I already am, right?
I think near the end of my working life at that environment, I became very vocal about mental health and my mental health, and I honestly just kind of stopped giving a shit what people thought. And I'm like, I have to talk about this because I don't want these. There's a culture in nursing, and it's very well, it's made very clear. Nurses eat their young. I'm pretty sure you guys have probably heard that, maybe. It's a thing. It's you're supposed to be proud for eating the young, for giving the new nurses a hard time. Like you said, it's almost like an initiation that you have to go through. Um, but why would you want anyone to suffer through that? So I just started becoming very vocal, and you know trying to just put a stop to all of that, and just speaking up. And like I said, it didn't bode well for me, but at least I kind of did what I could in terms of trying to put an end to that culture, and just telling people enough is enough. And
Yeah.
Did you find
Well,
that? And sorry, I was just curious too. If you found when you started to talk up to people, did anybody come up in private or like reach out to you in private and just like be kind of appreciative of you standing up or making a stand or being public about that?
I've had a few people actually approach me or message me, I guess, and just say, hey, you know what? Thank you so much for being verbal about this, being an advocate, because they're suffering too.
Hmm.
Um, and that made all the difference in the world to me. That, hey, like, I might be being talked about, I might be ostracized, but if I'm making a difference for a couple of my coworkers, that's the most important thing.
Hmm.
um
well, sacrifice 1 to 7 million, right?
yeah, and you know what, if I'm that one, then so be it. I just really hope, I know now that I've left, there's some things in place in terms of, more peer supports put in place, but unfortunately there's still a lot of mistrust. And I see this in some of the other services too. The organizations put peer support in place within the organization, and a lot of people don't trust that support network because management's involved, right? So
we were talking about that actually, and we were I met with the EMS Foundation, and that was one of the things that came up. Before we get too crazy, I'm gonna comment on your sweater there. I've got your back 911, and you've jumped on board with them like right away. You've been supporting everything that Nick and I have been doing, and it's great. And that's the one thing that we need. And I'll tell you right now, I've experienced. I'm sure Nick hasn't experienced it yet with this channel, but I'm sure he's experienced it elsewhere, because I manage the channel right now. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, like, I like what you're doing. It's really cool. It's going to reach a lot of new people. It'll provide another resource outside of the current programs that businesses and companies and services already have in place, because some of these people that are running them maybe running them just to have an extra project on board, or it looks better on a resume, or some of them truly are passionate about trying to help and get into that. But you know what? Not everybody is going to align with that person. So they might be fearful to actually go and talk to them and utilize that program. So being able to branch out and reach out on a peer-to-peer level, like Natalie Harris is doing with her Wings of Change, that's huge, right? It's allowing you to branch out in a much different level. And that's kind of what this channel is going to be too, right? Is allow people to realize, okay, like, I can talk. There is somebody out there that I can talk to. Now, somebody might stumble across this video and say, oh, I can talk to Angela. She would be a great person to talk to. She's been there. She's done that, right? And then you can kind of help them out, and you can help each other out. We can build this big community. But I've had people come up, and I've heard, again, behind my back, I've had people say, he's not educated, he shouldn't be talking about it. And, a few things that Nick and I discussed, it kind of felt like a jab and to my character, right? Like, I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to put something together with a buddy that I had met that all have the same mission, and, bring a little light to the conversation and make it easier for people to talk about. And it's definitely needed. And like I said, with the EMS Foundation, that's exactly what popped up is, like, it gives another resource. Hopefully we can shine a little light and make it okay to talk about. But I was just telling Nick, I replied back with the whole thought of, you know what, if they're making jokes about it, that means they're paying attention. And if they're paying attention, that means they care one way or another, whether they like it or not. They're paying attention to what you're doing because they care what you're doing.
So one of the things that I find, really ironic about this too is, like, if I'm talking to somebody and they're coming in, especially if I'm finding that they're talking to me and they're talking about hard things, but they're constantly laughing, right? So I go into this whole kind of weird nerd storytelling where I let them in on a little bit too much information on me, like I'm about to do to the world here. But so, like, I only and I promise there's a point. I only watch horror movies, right? That's the only kind of movies that I like, and not like the slasher kind of gory ones, but just like the jump scare ones, like the newer ones, like, Sinister and all of those ones. So anyways, so when Insidious came out, I think it was, when Insidious came out, have either of you seen that movie?
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, no, didn't think so. But
I can't watch
fair enough. So when it came out, what tends to happen, right, is they tend to get you the same way over and over again, and you get used to that pattern, right? So they come up and they scare you, and you get used to that pattern. About halfway through, you get tired or bored, and that's why the end of the movie sucks. So what the Insidious did was different, is they brought two guys in that were hilarious, right? And it fit with the story, but they were funny, and it didn't seem like it should fit, right? But I was pissed, because what happens is they get you all the way. They bring two people in the middle of the movie that are hilarious, and as soon as you laugh, you reset that. You've reset that in your mind, right? Because once you laugh, you're telling yourself it's okay and it's good, right?
And now you forgot about everything else.
Well, you haven't forgotten, and if you're me, you're just pissed off because they're about to get you really good again. But why I bring that up is because if somebody's making jokes and are laughing, right, it's often because they want to say something serious, but they want to pad it, right? And so when somebody's in my chair, for instance, they're trying to say something hard and they're laughing, it's almost like the Gestaltian approach where I go, well, why are you smiling and laughing when you tell me this? And it's like, well, I don't know, because it's embarrassing, and then we kind of dig a little deeper, and it's like, well, actually, because it's kind of shameful, and I'm padding that feeling, right?
Makes it easier for them to say.
Yeah, and so it's all about that awareness, right? And so somebody's making jokes, right? If it wasn't serious, if it didn't hit a vein, if it wasn't making sense, there wouldn't be any jokes, right? There just wouldn't be anybody tuning in. right?
Right.
But because it touches on something truthful that they can touch and they can know, and you know, for whatever reasons, that, I mean, we don't have them on to find out what the belief system is, because there's one working, right? It's that, well, we got to make a joke because what you're saying is true, but we want to diminish it because it's attacking some piece of this, right? And so really, when they laugh, they're saying more about what's going on with them than they think, you know. And that's one of the things here, when I heard that story, is kind of in my mulling over in the back of my head about how kind of ironic that is.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely true. You know, in what you're saying, and that people do make jokes or make light of situations because it's hitting on something that's affecting them as well. And
Because they care.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and you know what? We work in a field that, like, you talked about the stigma, and there's a stigma for not being able to handle, you know, the razzing, the humor, um, and you know, you guys have bad calls, we have bad days at the hospital, but you know what? You're supposed to be able to just brush it off and go eat your lunch, you know, or brush it off and you got to go to the next person. And you know, if you want to try to, it's, I find it ironic that in a caring profession such as nursing, we're not very caring towards each other.
Each other. Yep.
We're not allowed to
I,
talk about our feelings. Like, God forbid we bring up how we're feeling.
well,
Right?
and why is somebody going to bash you for trying to help somebody else? That just makes them look even more like an asshole.
Yeah. And I think it's, you know, in a lot of ways, because it's tuning in on how they're feeling deep down inside. It's maybe they're feeling insecure about their issues, and you know what would happen if they actually got brought to light as well. Because you know, we're accountable to a college, and actually I find this pretty kind of, talking about, you know, having management set up peer support networks or helplines. Our college just released a memo talking about how they have a mental health addictions support network that we can reach out to now. It's supposed to be confidential, um, but the issue is, if we self-report that we're struggling with mental illness or addictions or something, our license is stripped. Our fitness to practice is questioned. And yeah, we are you know, you do have to look out for the safety of the public and the patients that we care for. Um, but who's going to want to go self-report or, you know, get help from someone that's in a position to take away your income? And in my personal case, I was a part-time worker, so having to take time off work, I didn't have benefits to pay for me to go get additional support and help. Everything that I had to access was out of my pocket, and that can cause a whole other realm of like stresses, right? Financially.
Well, it just piles on. Yeah. A friend of mine's
Right.
going through the same thing.
Yeah. So I mean, this is why these peer support networks and groups are so important. I say that, but I also believe you still need the professional aspect in there as well. You still need a doctor or a psychologist, a psychiatrist. But it's, you know, trying to access something like this through your organization. You know, I think organizations put it out there so that they're basically covering their ass, that they can say they've done something to try to support their employees, right? Um, and you know, with that being said, like, I find it interesting. There's a lot of anger. Like for me, I went through a really angry stage. So talking about this with you guys right now is fine. I'm past that anger. I don't have that anger in me that I had 6 months ago. I was right angry 6 months ago.
Never in doubt.
Yeah. So it's sad that we choose profession like that. You know, people I've talked to, a few years ago, I tried to start a support group geared towards just nurses, and a lot of the feedback I got was, well, you guys, you chose that profession, you chose this, you know, you chose to work the long shifts, you chose to be in a profession where you're caring for people. We didn't choose to go to work to be harassed by family members. We didn't choose to go to work to be, harassed by our peers. I don't think anyone would choose to go to any job, whether it's, Burger King or a government job, and be harassed or bullied by their coworkers.
Or the general public, for that
Yeah.
matter.
Right?
Like I've I have heard a lot of stories about, like the general public coming up to the firefighters. Hey, why are you guys fueling up? You're burning fuel. Why are you out grocery shopping? You're burning my tax dollars. And all you can do is giggle and say, sir, about 11 cents of every year's paycheck that you have might come to us. Other than that, it's going to other services. I wouldn't even worry about it. But here, make a complaint, right? Like, and those kinds of things just add to your day. You might have had a shit day. You might have been dealing with a dying patient all day long, where you were on your feet. You didn't have time to go to the bathroom. You didn't have time to go to lunch. You're staying an hour and a half late just to finish all your charts. My wife does that on a regular basis. People don't know that. She doesn't charge for that lots of times. She doesn't. Yeah. So it's.
And we don't charge because it's too much hassle to put in all the paperwork that is, the overtime.
That's right. And it should be taken care of for you, because that's a lot of overtime if you compile that every single day that you work for an entire year.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of money that my family is missing out on, but she does it because not only is it a lot of work, but she doesn't think that a half an hour of her time is that valuable, but it really is,
And not only money, it's the time with your family too, right?
That's why it's valuable.
Yeah, that up over 365 days. That's a lot of hours away from your family.
Yep. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that I'm thinking about when we're talking about this too is when I, especially when I hear your story, because I don't pretend to know what it's like to be in the ER other than what I see, the few times you drop someone off, or when I'm there on my own behalf. But I'm thinking too that, if you create an atmosphere where there's kind of this toxicity going, it's always high stress, no matter who you are there. People are burning out. It just seems like you create a cauldron of the perfect concoction for exactly what you experienced, right? And it's certainly not an excuse, but viewing this through kind of a survival tactic of I just gotta, just to distract from how shitty I feel inside, I gotta take it out on somebody else, and then that goes down from that person onto somebody else, and if that goes on to somebody else, and so on. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, where do you even begin to try to fix something like that? Like, where do you even begin to try to undo that? It's like, because it doesn't seem that there's going to be one magic, thing that you can do that's going to stop this kind of train wreck of bullshit that propagates. And this isn't, this is just what I'm drawing from listening to you talk, Angela, but certainly you can see this in other agencies as well, right? When you talk to them, it's like, well, we talked about, management creating a peer team. It's like, how do we put things in place? Because if it's between a management driven peer team and nothing at all, it's like, what do we got to put in place so that some trust could be developed over time, and that we could get an effective thing in, even though management's connected, maybe by arm's length, by funding training or funding whatever. But like, does that mean, specifically, it's like, well, listen, if you got brass, you don't sit on the panel, you don't sit on the committee, you're not connected. And so that's just what was been kind of mulling over my mind about listening to this and going, right, we know that it's broken, but what's like the steps towards just even trying to think about or talk about fixing it?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of the things we were talking in previous episodes, we were like, oh yeah, well, you're gonna have to breed it out and slowly kind of bring in, that training for that, or those programs to cover those things. One thing I was going to touch on was exactly that. In my household, my wife and I have both kind of been discussing with each other over the last few months, like, yeah, I know you're pissed off and something made you angry, but you don't have to treat me as if I'm the one who caused it. Right? Somehow figure out in our own minds where we can draw that line, like, okay, it was that person or that situation. I'm done with it now. I shouldn't be mean to my wife or my kids because I'm pissed off because of that. Or, you know, I for video game players, oh, I died, I shouldn't toss the controller across the room and ruin the fun for somebody else just because I'm pissed off, right? So that might be a good start to kind of work with the person on the individual level and try and get people in the mindset of like, yeah, even though I'm sad or I'm angry, I shouldn't intentionally outburst all of that. I should work through it, you know, and I should know how to ask for help to deal with that. And I mean, training situations, again, it's just kind of teaching people not to be an asshole, right? I don't really know how you can stop something from that, like that happening, but I know you can bring a lot more awareness to it and training to it and implement more and more things. But it's hard to get people to jump on those courses if they're not getting paid for it, or you know, it's taken away from their own personal time, or they're not actually experiencing it themselves. So I get where you're at. Like, where can we implement this training, or you know, change that culture?
Well, I think like you touch on it too when you talk about the personal connection for you too, because you know I'm thinking, well, we could should this all day, but the fact of the matter is in that moment I'm angry and I'm managing that emotion in that moment. It's not that I'm consciously choosing it. It's like I'm letting that emotion drive those actions at that point, right? And so now we take that small kind of example and we put it in a workplace, and we add all of these other stressors and all of these other issues, and now it's like, okay, so we could just should ourselves as professionals and we shouldn't be doing all of these things. It's like, but I've got this cascading of shit emotions, like just negative grossness coming down the line at me, and it's like, how do I vent that out when, you know, I can be a piece of shit to person A over here, and that makes me feel like this iota better because I've blown their candle out, so mine must shine brighter. And yet I'm just gonna have, you know, more shit come down, or maybe then management comes down breathing down my neck on something else, and it's like, you know, so it's one of those things where, and I don't have the answer, right? It's just, to me it's you know, to be, it's a bit curious and like just trying to figure out what the fuck you can do to try to solve these problems, because they're not isolated, they're not, you know, isolated events, and they seem to transcend profession a lot of the ways, especially in our fields with kind of that high demand, and you know, it's like high demand, high pressure with low control, right? And it's like, well, we know that those situations already jack up our anxieties, if, you know, just on a normal day. It's like, how do we manage those at a level that we can retire from the professions, you know, healthy and happy?
That's right. Well, and again, like as you were talking there, I just related it. I relate everything back to sports because I grew up playing hockey, right? And that's
We won't hold that against you.
yeah, right. My dad, one of the best coaches I ever had, one of the worst coaches I ever had, due to the fact that me being his son, I was lowest on the totem pole, even if I was on the top with my team, right? Like he treated you that way because he was trying to build your character. And the one thing he always said, he's like, if you don't finish as a team, you're not a winner. He's like, I don't care if you're the one who has the most goals in the game, but if you left somebody behind on your team, nobody wins. So anytime we ran lines, if I was the very first person to finish lines, I had to go back with the last guy that was the slowest and finish all his lines with him. And if you finished your lines, you went back with those other two to finish with the last guy until he made it all the way across that line and finished together. So I'm thinking maybe that's something we need to start teaching and say, okay, like it's a lot more about taking care of each other and knowing that, okay, I'm not going to put this on him just because I'm pissed off and I'm managing it in the moment. So that might be somewhere where, like, mentality wise, it might be something where we bring somebody in to help coach through that and teach through that and build the team as a whole. So you can, in the moment, you automatically click over and go, yeah, okay, I need to talk to somebody about this right now before it gets out of hand. Or in those moments where you're jacked up and you're super, you know, you're in the moment and things are crazy, you know, be able to take a step back in your mind and say, okay, like, just because things are happening right now doesn't mean I need to be mean to that person, or I need to say that thing, or, you know, kind of have a 3-stage filter in your mind for that kind of a purpose.
I think, you know, getting, you know, the theory of the team building is great. It's the getting people on board, right? And when, you know, when you have a whole group of people that have lost hope for any type of change ever occurring, you know, like you get these meetings that are scheduled or lunch and learns, and it's just like everyone kind of rolls their eyes like, okay, another one. Like what's going to make a difference? And you know, I like what you said about like when you had to run lines. When I was in the hospital setting, my theory was I'm not done work until my whole team's done work. So just because my patients are cared for doesn't mean that I'm going to sit down at the desk and go on Facebook now. I'm going to go and help my teammates until all of their tasks are done. And then we can all sit down together. And I think it's just instilling, you know, I think in nursing what happened was there was I'm going to call it a divide, because RPNs and RNs, there were some different, and originally an RN was in charge of RPNs, and eventually RPNs became more autonomous. And because we fought so much for that autonomy, then there was this divide that, oh, we're not going to ask for help or offer help because we have our patient focus. So I think it's time, especially in the nursing profession, to like, we're one profession, we're not, it's and I think it could, I can't speak for emergency services, you know, ambulance, fire, but I know when you guys are out in the field, you have to be a team as well. It's not just all, you can't just be out there for yourself and say, well, my piece of the fire's put out, I'm gonna go have a coffee now, and what, you know what I mean? Like it's got to be, you all work until the work's done. So just getting people on board with that mentality, it's this problem wasn't created in a day, and I don't think it's going to be fixed in a day, but raising awareness like we're doing is certainly one step on the ladder, right?
Well, and you have to get that conversation started, which is why when people, you know, comment and beat me down about it, I'm like, you know what, that's fine. If you don't want to be on board, that's fine. But there's no reason for you to drag me down while I'm trying to bring people up, right? And the mentality of it is the hardest part. And like you said, getting people on board with it is going to be the most tricky part. And having everybody see the same thing you are, and have people picture the same vision you are. And it's funny because I'm sure everybody in the workplace experiences workplace bullying at one point or another. So those people that are beating you down for it are kind of adding to the problem, right?
And who knows, maybe they're being bullied, we're not recognizing it. So it's, you know, it's like that trickle down effect, like the proverbial go home and kind of kick the dog type thing, right?
Yeah.
They're kicking you because they're being kicked by someone else.
Yeah.
And don't recognize it or see it.
I never understood the someone that kicks the dog. I mean, I could kick a cat, I can get that, but just never a dog. I never got that one.
Go home and play hide the cat. Oh, it's in the oven. Sorry. Sorry for all the cat lovers out there. I'm just not a cat guy, so.
Yeah, I'm not sorry.
Oh man. Well, what are some of Angela? What are some of the like? I don't know how comfortable you are talking about them. What are some of the personal experiences you've had that have really driven you out of the hospital setting?
I think just that whole like return to work experience that I was talking about, in terms of knowing that someone had gone on to my social media and taken, it's not like I was riding roller coasters and stuff. I was out walking my dog, you know. I use, as you know, Colorado, I use walking my dog as therapy for me. I get out there and I enjoy the air. I enjoy just watching her play in the water. And you know, so that really kind of hurt me, just knowing that someone would kind of throw me under the bus in terms of, yeah, I was off work, but that doesn't mean I was bedridden or you know, trapped in my house. I was out walking my dog. I wasn't on vacation in Jamaica, and if I was, really, who cares?
Yeah. Well, some places prescribe nature as a way to deal with things.
Yeah, and for me, like that's something that after I was I was hospitalized for some mental health issues, and you know, I didn't really buy into the whole getting out and exercising business, but you know, that there's a lot of validity to that, to getting outside and moving. And so yeah, for me, it was actually, I would say it was a prescription. Other things, just the clicks you guys were talking about, like how kind of, there's different cliques that evolve. It's you say you don't want it to be like high school or a playground, but it's a lot like high school. Just, people going out and going to functions and you're not invited, or just being excluded in the lunchroom type thing, right? Like I said, I didn't really ever care too much about that, but I think subconsciously it does kind of wear on you. Just, and just, I was personally having issues in terms of, so facing these people talking about my um, mental health, and that could be part of the PTSD I live with too, is you get very paranoid, I think, and that you possibly think people are talking about you and maybe they're not, but you become very hyper vigilant about everything. So going to work, I was having massive anxiety attacks on my way into work. I would sit in the parking lot and literally debate about calling in from the parking lot type thing. It was horrible. And then you'd kind of get in there and a good mood, and you try to be positive, and the first thing you'd get is a coworker going, "Oh, Jesus Christ, I've got 6 patients," and like, just from the very start, you're trying to go in and, "Hey, have a great day, and how's your morning?" And just that whole negative energy, it just sucks you. It sucks every bit of life out of you. And for me, the feeling of having to walk into that environment every day was just throwing me into panic. And it was really difficult. So when I finally did have my Jerry Maguire moment and kind of blew up at work, it wasn't very professional of me to blow up and have a little meltdown. A long time coming. At that point in time, it's time for me to leave, to take a. I didn't quit right away, but when some time off my mental health.
Yeah, well, that's much needed.
Yeah, and like I said, it's unfortunate in our profession. The workload is forever increasing right now as well. Our profession is quite broken. So, you'd get in situations where you'd have an unsafe patient load, and God forbid we use the word unsafe. We're not allowed to use that word. We're not, in our reporting of incidents, never could we put our patient load was unsafe. It's a taboo word in the hospital, but in reality, like, we need to be able to be honest about those situations. Like, if it's unsafe, it's unsafe. For me, not being able to provide the care I was trained to provide to my patients was becoming almost, it was like a moral injury, right? You're being faced with, family members who are upset because their loved one has had to wet themselves because you were tied up in another room. And if that was my loved one, I'd be upset too. So you get this moral injury, like, you can't give the care you want to give, that you were trained to give, and that also plays on you too. So you've got your toxic work environment, you got your coworkers that are negative, you've got the inability to provide the care you have to provide to people, or you want to provide to people, and it all just adds up. And my mental health took a beating. I don't know how far you want me to go in with the mental health aspect of things, but
well, I mean, that's what the whole channel is based around. We were, or the biggest thing, like, I was actually going to ask, how out of all of this, how did your managers handle that?
well, initially, when I went back to work, they were wanting to do a check-in with me. So I had to check in with OC Health every week. And it was basically, yeah, I'm fine. Right? That's all I had to say was I'm fine. There was never really any, here's the number for EAP. Right? So the referrals to EAP. It's a taboo subject. Taboo. And I was like the first kind of, I don't know how you want to say it. I guess I was like the first nurse that came forward with mental health issues, so they had no idea what to do really.
Yeah.
Since then, since I've left, I know there's some things that have been put in place. I remember one time having a particularly rough day and having to fill out some incident reports, and instead of them, debriefing me and saying, "Oh, you had a really rough day," I got an email saying I filled out the reports wrong. So that, there's ways you can handle things. I don't want to talk shit about my management or even my organization, because if they don't know, they don't know. And this is where the whole education piece comes in. And if they've had no one in their organization speak up and go on leave and struggle with mental health or, PTSD, you can't really blame them for not knowing how to handle it. I would hope that they've learned, but I still feel, just from some of the chatting that I've heard from other people, it's a very hands-off approach. If you're dealing with someone who's targeting you, it was like, okay, we'll work it out amongst yourselves.
Yeah, but then it doesn't always work. Watching a TED Talk earlier about that, actually, that's, especially in the fire service, that's the first thing we're told. Can you work it out amongst yourselves? And you know what? That person might not be able to do that for themselves. Like, you might just say, hey, like, how many times do you have to say stop? Right? That's me trying to work it out amongst ourselves. And if he's still not listening, then I shouldn't have to go to my management and then him tell me again, work it out amongst yourselves, and then come back and say me, well, I'm coming to see you because it didn't work out,
And I mean, you're always, I guess I see it with my son. Like, you're taught from a young age to go talk to the person and tell them to stop and this and that. But that's not always, like you said, it's not effective all the time. You know, for myself, if someone was making comments, you'd try to tell them, hey, like, or for me, I'm not very direct, so it's hard for me to say, hey, you've hurt my feelings, or saying that is not appropriate. I was kind of like the shut up and deal with it type of person until, like I said, near my Jerry Maguire moment, I just got to a point where, nope, I'm just gonna
just done with it.
yeah, and I'm gonna start talking, because if I don't, like, this is a systemic problem, right? And I think, it's hard because, again, going back to that lack of trust, you go in and you try to talk to management, and they're like, well, you know what, something's gonna be done about it. I was told once, by one of the leaders in my organization that perhaps I needed to find a different job. That was one response I received, and that was absolutely not helpful.
That's ridiculous. Doesn't solve anything, because it's just going to happen to the next person.
So then to have to go above that leader to the next leader, it was quite embarrassing. And do you, like you guys talked about before, do you really want to be that person, right? Do you want to be the person to stir the pot?
Yeah. Well, then in that situation, then, if I'm sure you've come up with a few different things you'd like to say to people about that. Like, do you have any tips from your own experiences that people, like, how they should maybe try and deal with it, or any ways they can become a little bit more resilient to it and kind of deal with it on their own hands?
I when you were talking about your sports analogy earlier, I almost feel like if you could almost like call a timeout, not like a just like a 2-minute timeout. Like, hey, you know what? Let's take a timeout. Let's go someplace private and discuss this. Let's not do it at the nurse's station. Or hey, you know what? You appear like you're having a rough day. Let's take a couple seconds to go and talk about this. Give people the ability to like step away, or tell someone else on their team, you just step away for a few minutes. And because in our profession and most like your professions, you can't just step away. You're when you're on the job, you've got people's lives at risk.
That's right.
So you can, but if you can have the ability to rely on one of your team members to say, you know what, I need like a 30-second time out just to go in the hallway or something. Just give each other give permission to each other to talk, give permission to feel, and that might sound hokey and far-fetched, and people are really eye-rolling when they hear that, but we have to give each other permission to express our feelings. Do bottle it all up, and you're putting up with it, and people are going to snap, and people are going to be miserable, and they're going to, now your lunch bag is taken up the top shelf, like, and again, this is why I'm saying I don't think people intentionally bully. I don't think they intentionally bully. I think there's just so much brewing and bubbling inside of them that at some point it's just going to snap.
Yeah, I agree.
Their permission, like a space, and understand that, somehow find a way to make those spaces safe, right?
Yeah, no, and I mean, especially in our like when it comes down to, either reprimanding somebody or, trying to do a little bit of corrective action, we shouldn't ever in the moment stop that person, like on a call, in a room, in front of patients' parents, whatever it is. If you need to have that moment, you totally need to give permission for it on both ends, right? And be able to take that moment to go step out in the hallway and have a chat about something that happened, or if there was an incident, so you can pull them aside after the call and say, hey, I see what I did, a little plug there, Nick, and give them that chat, right? Let them know what's going on, and take that time to step away. I totally agree, and that's actually a really good tip, and we should also not be afraid to do that, right? Like pull them aside and say, hey, like, this that bugged me.
Yeah, I think it's, if you can put a culture like that into place, that will eventually, I think, build trust within an organization. And, having it peer supported in the organization, taking that time away, not having management involved necessarily, except for, management has to make the policy to give those timeouts. But I think, if you can, building that trust, or just expressing to your coworker, like, you know what, you're not alone in how you're feeling. Like, I've had days like that too. We're here to support each other. It's not all for one. It's not an individual effort here. Like, we're all here to support each other, and we need to build that supportive environment rather than eating each other alive. And I think, I would really just tell people, speak up. Like, don't be afraid to stir the pot. Like, if you don't stir the pot, someone else beside you is going to suffer like you're suffering. And, in most organizations, they have policies, again, back to policies, but they have anti-retaliation policies. So if if I don't think people should fear, like, retaliation does happen, but most organizations have something in place that would, strongly discourage that kind of behavior. And if that behavior occurs, then, I know in most organizations, the person who is retaliating is terminated. So I don't think you can be afraid to speak up. I would hate for anyone else to be in a position like me where you actually have to leave your job.
Right.
It's,
So you'd say then timeouts are definitely a good one, and then being able to speak up and actually, approach both the person that's, causing you that problem, and then your managers as well.
Yeah, and I mean that's always a sticky wicket. But I would, to management and to upper levels in organization, I would say the most beneficial thing you can do is believe employees that come, make them feel believed, make them feel heard, um, because that's going to encourage people to be able to come and talk to you. The best thing that's ever happened to me was having someone say, "Hey, I believe you. I believe what you're going through, and let's figure out a way that we can solve it." I mean,
I
that
think, yeah, I agree with you there. Sorry. I was going to say too, like that's huge. Having somebody believe you and not believing secondhand information, right? If you're getting information from somebody behind that person's back and not fully following through with the information that you're getting and doing your own investigation and making that decision on your own, that's a tough one. So on like you're saying with managers, like if you can believe first and then pick away at it, that's a better approach, because 9 times out of 10 that person's actually dealing with something, and that's why they're there.
yeah. And you know what? You might find as a manager, that an employee comes to you because, oh, they're upset about something that another employee is doing to them, and it might seem minuscule to you. Like, you might think, well, what's the big deal about this? And if you do dig a little deeper, maybe your employee's having some issues at home or issues in their personal life, and this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So you know you have to, especially in our industries, you have to support your employees. It's not as simple as, um, okay, well, you know what, someone put their lunch bag on your shelf. Like, that might have broke the camel's back, but who knows what you're bringing in from home? Who knows what you've collected over the years and years of service that you're harboring within yourself, right? Like, it's, some people talk about one incident that causes them, hey, this is causing my nightmares, this has caused my trauma, that one call, that one patient. For me, and I would say many people, it's a collective buildup of things. It's not, for me, it wasn't just one thing. It was years of stuff happening, right, that caused me to snap.
So sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say the important piece too that you're taking away is kind of my beef with this approach that, we have that uni-diagnostic model where we only have, we're only looking at the workplace for coverage for mental health. And I think this is the part that rubs me in what you're saying, is recognizing that if we're going to treat the employee holistically, if we're going to look at what's going on, so that we have bullying in the workplace, well, that's just one cog in the machine of things. Like, if you're taking that home, then home is becoming more tumultuous and more chaotic, and then I'm taking that back to work, and then that's just kind of creating all of these pieces. And so, while work can't go in and fix the home piece, we can look at and say, if I can make this cog just work and function as well as we can for you, perhaps the other ones, you'll be in a better suit to take care of. And the ironic piece is, if they can do that, and they can do that successfully, they'll save themselves a ton of money and time and employee loss and retention and payouts by just caring for the employee at the outset. I don't think that there's any metrics that I've seen that show that just constantly turning over employees makes it a profitable or makes any good sense when I look at what it costs to prevent or mitigate versus treat and act reactively.
Well, in a business sense, the employees are what make you money, right? Especially if it's a service industry. So happy employees, a lot less you have to train, a lot less you have to take care of, a lot less they're going to get hired out somewhere else. You're building a strong team, and you don't have to go through that over and over and over again, like you're saying.
And in that same piece, right, that whole, I think the proactive approach to treating these issues rather than a reactive approach. So organizations have to find a way to, right now, I feel like they're just kind of reacting to issues. So yeah, we've got these problems going on. We're going to set policies and procedures in place, but how, going forward, like, let's be proactive about how to prevent these things in the first place, right? Let's just stop reacting. I mean, that's reaction is just a band-aid fix, right? Like, we got to dig deep and get down. And in my profession, we got to do the blood work. We got to, do testing. We got to figure out what's causing this bleed, right?
Well, that's like Nick and I were discussing too. Like in our profession, lots of times it takes somebody getting hurt or dying before we implement new things, right? And we're getting a lot better now. Like the fire service in a whole is growing so fast, and we're starting to acknowledge all these things, and especially the mental health waves coming through. And that's where we're saying, okay, yeah, we get it, we're aware. It's time to be literate. It's time to teach. It's time to educate. It's time to prevent, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I think I would slightly disagree too, because I think that we're not aware of the mental health. We're aware of PTSD, right? We're aware of the worst case scenario, but we're not aware of all of the little tiny mental health things that can happen or lead up to it. And I think that's part of, what you said at the end there, becoming literate and not just aware, right? Recognizing that, anxiety and depression can be just as necessary for us to look at and treat and support, as waiting for them to collect over the years all of these things into kind of the worst case scenario for us, right? And so that I don't like passing a chance to ruffle feathers, and so there's mine, and it's that you know I said this, actually I said this to a reporter the other day that called me, because he was pretty dumbfounded when he said what I thought of stigma, and I said, well, I think that it's alive and well, and we're not doing a good job with it. And the disbelief of, well, I've been talking and writing about this for so long. And I said, yeah, but take a look at how we treat people when they act based on a mental health, something I contribute to mental health, right? How do we treat them? By scolding them, by firing them, by shaming them, by doing all of these pieces. This is both, individually, but organizationally, personally, socially, social media especially, right? There's only two emotions on social media: it's love or hate. So it depends on what group you're in that day. And I'm thinking, we do talk a lot of talk, and that is totally necessary, right? But we're just staying on that threshold behind. If I just say enough words, these keywords in it, then that's the CYA I need to just say, well, we're totally on board with this, and we're totally doing all of these things, and yet we're letting our folks just kind of languish in the shit until something big happens, right? And I don't think this is directly organizationally, but even culturally, right? Like it's, and I think we've talked about this before, is like I can't take anything seriously but PTSD. And so then we've got to endure bullying, or we got to endure the things that are going on, because we got to wait for that diagnosis, or wait for whatever it is, so that at least my colleagues or my coworkers will take it seriously, right?
Right. Well, and that's the same thing with what we're doing, right? Yeah. People are making jokes about it. People are talking poorly about it, or saying, "Oh, they're not educated to be talking about this, or they're not experienced to be." Who cares? Mm-hmm. They're trying to do something good. They're trying to figure out a problem. They're trying to help. And if you keep beating those people down for coming out and saying, "Hey, I'm suffering with this problem," you're not going to fix the problem. Like they almost have to dig themselves into a deeper hole for somebody to realize, holy crap, that person's not doing all right.
Yeah.
Take them seriously.
And I think too, just about the whole education piece, you can read millions of books, take millions of courses, without
I'm trying real hard,
but without some sort of lived experience, right? Where does the understanding truly come from? I could read millions of books on what it is like for a cancer patient, but unless I have cancer, if I really have no idea. For me as a nurse, prior to becoming ill, I had no empathy for people with mental illness. I was like, yeah, you know what? Get over yourself, dust it off. Like, what is so bad that you wanted to kill yourself? Or what is bothering you so much that you have to take medications to calm yourself down? I had no clue. And I knew there was a fine line. And I remember asking so many people, God, like, I wonder what that fine line is that people cross, because something has clearly happened to them to cause this. And then suddenly I had stepped over that line myself, and wow, what an awakening, right? Like, if I can say anything about this wild journey, like, God, like, my eyes are wide open now. My
I think experiences speak a lot louder than education, right? And that's why I think Natalie Harris is starting to spread her message so well, because she's dug down so far in her life and climbed back out. Everybody can connect and relate, right? Even the person that's never experienced anything in their life, they're like, holy crap, that was moving. I get it now, even on the slightest bit chance that we can utilize that to help crush that stigma, that's one step closer, right?
Yeah.
That's where we are excited to bring people like yourself on and kind of share the stories, right? And let people know that, somebody else in your profession has been there. They've done that person might be able to relate better to you than they can with me and Nick. And, it's just, especially for him and I being both of us firefighters, right? That's where we kind of make a lot of our references. And it's very similar, a lot of other, public service professions, but it allows people to connect on a whole different level, I find. And I mean, yeah, we need to be literate, but at the same time, we need to kind of bring the street smarts of it as well, right? Not just the book smarts.
Yeah. And I think I really want to thank you guys for inviting me along today, because, in the nursing profession, there's still a huge stigma, and it's so risky for nurses to speak up about their mental health. It's, and I really want to find, to help kind of create a safe place. It's funny because I had commented on an article about a nurse in St. Catharines that had gone off with PTSD, and she was trying to raise awareness. And I got some random email from somebody about, hey, I don't know if you're the right person to talk to, but they were suffering with PTSD, and, they've had to leave the nursing profession as well. And what could they do? And so I, first of all, I was shocked because I couldn't quite figure out how this person connected with me, but it was just some random, like I said, some comment. But I was so touched and pleased that they felt that they could actually reach out for some support. And I was able to provide them with some resources to turn to in their area. And just more importantly, make them feel like, hey, you know what? You're not alone in your struggle. And you know what? I'm one nurse speaking out, but I bet you there's hundreds that wish they could speak out.
We appreciate you having you on. If there's one thing that you can leave, like if there's a message you can leave with somebody, what would it be?
I would just want to encourage anyone, whether you're in the first responder field or nursing field or wherever you are in life, if you're struggling, you know what, it's so important to reach out and just talk to somebody, because you're not alone in your struggles. When you're in that dark pit and your vision is so tunnel visioned, sometimes you feel like you're the only one that is where you are right now. But I just want to assure people, many people have been where you are. We don't all have the same stories as you might have, but there's so much support out there, and don't suffer alone.
Cool. Well, that's a pretty good message. Just talk. Just find something and reach out. I like that. That's good. Cool. Yeah, I figure there's lots of things we can chit chat on. Maybe we'll have to have you back on again when we come up with another topic next time around, and definitely keep you on the list of guests anyways.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
What are your closing thoughts? What are your conclusion?
I think, like, in maybe it's the mindset I'm in right now, or being a bit under the weather. I think what I kept mulling over, and I guess maybe it was more quiet than I wanted to be, but I was still just thinking about, and I'm always thinking about, in some regards, it's like, it's I think the unfortunate truth, and what I think Angela is pointing out, is that, there's going to continue to be stories just like hers, of people struggling and people being pushed out of their careers or pushed out of the services. And I'm stuck on this idea of, what are some creative ways even that, you know, organizations have turned things around or have implemented or done different things, because it would be great to be able to share those, even if it's just ideas or people have like an agency that's kind of went, you know, a 180, to give folks, because, you know, I think that this is, you know, really pushing towards that literacy level of, you know, how do we turn a story into a learning experience is something that people can take away. I think that that's what I've been mulling over, you know, while I listened to our talk, but certainly I think my questions were kind of pointed that way too, is just really racking my brain on how do we change, you know, that conversation like that into something actionable.
Right. No, I totally get it. That's it. Again, that'll be a slow process, but I think it'll take an organization getting together and actually doing the research in all these different areas that happen to be doing one thing right and compiling everything that each organization happens to be doing right and putting it all into a program, right? And then implementing that, because not everybody's going to, you know, align, because not everybody is a sheep, but you'll be able to get the most of it and you'll be able to change the culture at least. And again, it might be a slow process and somebody will have to take the initiative to go out and find everything that works. I mean, this is where, like, I hope something like this reaches out to our viewers and they'll leave comments for us telling us, like, well, this is what's worked here and this is what's not worked. We hope that they share their experiences so that we can learn and kind of share that to everybody else that ends up stumbling on our channel. But yeah, it racks my brain too, because it's going to be a slow process.
Yeah, I think that, like, that's kind of what's on my mind right now. Is just, you know, and probably will be for the next fucking 5 days now. But it's like, you know, just thinking about working with an organization and you know, how to change a story like that, and you know, to the there's so many that are probably out there not talking about it. It's like, how do you make it better? Moving forward, what can we do? There's got to be something you can do at the grassroots versus the organizational level and all of those pieces. So yeah, I think I'm walking away definitely with you know, a mind that's running.
Yeah, well, and I, like, in the whole bullying aspect, I kind of see people don't think that the littlest thing is bullying. Like, you know, in my eyes, I'm excited to see people succeed, and nobody ever believes me when I say that. But I truly get excited when I'm watching them win. You know, and I've always learned. My dad's taught me too. Like, the more you help other people get what they want, inadvertently they'll help you get what you want. You know, like you will build a happiness for them. You'll build the success that rubs off. You'll build the attitude that rubs off, and it's contagious, right? And even just the littlest joke about something that somebody's doing could be considered bullying to them. They might not like that, right? And you blatantly know that joke probably shouldn't have come out of your mouth.
Yeah.
You know, or just beating somebody down on the regular. Oh, you can do this. Oh, you can do that. And you shouldn't do this. And you shouldn't do that. And it doesn't matter. If you honestly don't care about what that person's doing, don't say something. So that's just one example, right? But it could be many different things. It could be beating somebody to the printer every single day, and their paperwork doesn't get handed in on time, just because you were there and your due date was 2 days later, but you did it anyways because you're just trying to get at them, or you think it's funny, right? Like, it comes in all different kinds of forms, and everything in that sense just comes back to be a nice person. Don't be an asshole.
Don't be a dick. Yeah,
you're right. Like,
or be like you know, be a nice person 98% of the time, and just be a dick by yourself.
Right, but and mind you, there are places and times to be a dick. There are times that you need to stand your ground, but you don't have to be an asshole. You know, like, you can be firm and you can make a point, but at the same time, you need to follow up with a resolution, right? Like, there's got to be something there that fixes. Here's the issue, but here's how we're going to fix it. You know, like.
All I could think of is that we could probably create a really, like we were talking about memes last time, we could probably create a really good bullying meme with Team America, and it's like, you know, you got your dicks and you got your
yeah. I'm picturing it now. I see it. Cool. Well, it was a good chat. We'll
buddy.
catch all our viewers later. You guys have a good night, and